If you had grandparents in the 1980s, then this is the video for you. This was a time when grandparents had old stuff, but they also had new things that went along with them. In this video, we will have a look back at some of the things that 80s grandparents had in every home. Every grandmother had that old vacuum from the 1970s that had one of those bags that filled up with hot air when it was used. Kirby was probably the most popular, but there were many other brands. It could suck up anything from dirt to quarters and it would still keep working. If you ever saw her use it and the bag exploded, it would make a complete mess and you might even hear a cuss word or two. Even though she had that old vacuum cleaner, she still couldn't resist the newer technology. The dustbuster was something that no grandparent could do without. They were great for small messes and you didn't have to fuss with the big bulky vacuum and cord. Not only were they handy, but kids also loved to play with them and pretend that they were Ghostbusters while using it. Tupperware was something that every grandmother had in the 80s, and it wasn't just any Tupperware. This was the classic 1970s Tupperware that came in green, yellow, and orange. She most likely got them from a Tupperware party that she attended in the 70s, and these things lasted forever. If you ever got the opportunity to open one of these up, it had a very distinctive smell on the inside, which was food, dish soap, and plastic. Grandparents in the 80s were always very organized and they had all sorts of containers. If you ever peeked into their pantry, then you probably saw these glass containers. They could have had vegetables or mushrooms that were painted on the side, but they always had that top that clamped on and kept everything inside fresh. They stored things like tea, spices, and different dried goods. One of the most exciting places in your grandmother's house was the refrigerator. When you peeked inside, you would discover that there were all sorts of snacks and goodies. Hopefully, some of those things were for you. As you stepped up to the fridge, you couldn't get past opening the door without noticing all of their magnets. It was completely covered with them, and some of them were from trips that they took, while others were just fruit and veggies. The fruit and veggie magnets were more of a decoration because the magnets weren't really all that strong. Once you opened the fridge, there was another challenge. What was in the containers? If you were looking for Cool Whip or Country Crock, your grandmother had a lot of them in there. Yes, she had Tupperware, but for some reason she preferred to keep leftovers in these old containers. They were from a generation where they never liked to waste anything. Your grandmother seemed to be the only person who knew exactly what each container contained. Remember all the condiments that your grandparents had in the fridge? There was every kind that you could ever imagine because they wanted to please everyone. Some of those were in date and some of those were expired. If you ever asked her about the ones that were expired, she would say, they're still good. These were the old condiments that came in glass containers and not the squeezable bottles like you see today. When the ketchup or mustard ran low, she would add a little water just to get the last bit out. No grandparent's house is ever complete without a collection of something. And for grandmothers in the 80s, it was the Precious Moments figurines. They were off limits for anyone to touch because they were collectible. Remember seeing this old thermostat? It looked like some sort of control on a submarine, but it was not. This was off limits to you and even Grandma. If you did touch it, then you were going to hear from Grandpa, and it wasn't going to be good. Wood was everywhere in older homes. It was on the walls, and all of the side tables, coffee tables, and dining tables were made out of real wood. For some reason, every grandparent's house had these exact wood and cork coasters that were in the dining room or living room. We all used them so our drinks wouldn't ruin the wood furniture. One room that was basically off limits to kids was the fancy living room that had the plastic runners on the carpet and plastic covered furniture. It was there to protect it all, but yet you couldn't play in there. Another thing that you would see in every grandparent's home was a crystal ashtray. If they smoked, then they used it, and if they did not smoke, then they probably had friends that did, and that's why they had them. For some reason, your grandmother really wanted a stationary bike. A lot of times it just sat in a random room for no reason at all, and it might have even had some clothes draped across it. Your grandmother had it for years and yet hardly ever used it. These usually had an odometer on it, and they never had more than 25 miles on it unless the grandkids got on it, and then they put hundreds of miles on it. Grandparents always had their coffee every single morning, and they didn't go to Starbucks either. They had Folgers and Maxwell House that they ran through an old Mr. Coffee maker. That thing lasted forever, and they never got a newer one because they claimed that they don't make them like this anymore. Grandmothers always seemed like they could cook or bake anything, and they had years and years of practice. Their recipes were often housed in recipe boxes that sat up on top of the counter. That's something that you don't really see on kitchen counters anymore, as most people get their recipes digitally. Going to your grandparents' house was a lot like going to a historical museum. Some of their more modern clocks looked like this. The old flip number radio alarm clock was super mesmerizing, but they also had a ton of other clocks that were located around the home and super old. They were passed down from others in the family, so there were always more clocks than they ever needed. Do you remember seeing one of these? This was like a Swiss Army seat in your grandma's kitchen. It was a step stool and a seat, and she used it both ways. It was also a booster seat that kids would sit on and help her in the kitchen. Your grandmother had some sort of magazine that she loved, and so did your grandfather. They saved every single issue that they ever got because it had an article in it that they wanted to read again but never did. The same thing happened with old newspapers, but at least they used them for various things like cleaning windows, fire starters, and packing away holiday items. Once your grandmother bought plates, she wasn't going to get rid of them. She had the same plates and glasses that she used for the last 25 to 30 years. Those plates were very memorable, and some of the best meals that you ever had were served on them. Now, what was it about grandmothers and their plastic fruit? This bowl appeared on many tables and counters. This was another item that she had had for decades. Everyone knew that they were fake, but kids plucked off the plastic grapes and then chewed on them just to aggravate Grandma. These woven pads were used to protect the counters and wooden tables from hot cookware. They definitely served their purpose, and they saw a lot of casseroles that were on top of them. These old hot pads were once popular, but not many people have them anymore. Every home had a phone, but the one that Grandma had looked like it was something that she spoke to President Ford on. It was something that every kid loved to play on, and she wasn't going to upgrade it because it still worked. Next to this old phone was the trusty telephone list finder. It was just as handy as an address book, but you could locate any phone number quicker than you could with a Rolodex. It was a great way to keep all of your important numbers organized and readily available. If you ever saw one of these in your grandma's house, it could be super deceiving. Yes, it could have cookies, but it was probably going to have sewing supplies on the inside, so when you opened it up, you would be disappointed. In all seriousness, our grandmother's homes were special places that we enjoyed going to. A lot of these items we haven't seen in years, and yet they bring back a lot of memories. Some of the best meals that you ever ate were inside Grandma's home. What are some of the best memories that you remember inside your grandparents' home? Let us know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching.